You're sitting around a fire. It's 100,000 years ago. The flames crackle. The darkness presses in from every side. There are no police, no courts, no written laws, no one to call if someone takes your food or threatens your child. Yet somehow, your group survives. Night after night, year after year, for tens of thousands of years. No one is murdered in their sleep. Resources are shared, children are protected, conflicts are resolved. This isn't luck. This isn't chaos held together by fear. This is a system. A system so effective, so deeply woven into human behavior that it kept our species alive and cooperating for roughly 90% of our existence. A system we've almost completely forgotten. And here's the uncomfortable part. We replaced it with something we're not entirely sure is better. Cut to today. Legal codes thousands of pages long. Police forces on every corner. Surveillance systems tracking your movements. Entire bureaucracies dedicated to enforcing rules you've never read. Yet crime persists. Conflict persists. Loneliness and distrust are epidemic. We have more rules than any civilization in history, yet many people feel society is actively breaking down. Here's the tension that should make you uncomfortable. Ancient humans had none of this. No institutions, no enforcement agencies, no legal infrastructure. Yet they maintained functional cooperative societies for hundreds of thousands of years. We have every institutional tool imaginable. And we still struggle. What did they know that we've forgotten? What did they do that we've abandoned? And why does the modern system so often feel like it's working against human nature rather than with it? So here's the question. How did ancient humans survive and cooperate without any formal rules, laws, or authority? What nobody tells you is that the answer isn't that they were more violent or chaotic. It's that they had something we've lost. Something fundamental. Humans aren't naturally selfish or destructive. We're naturally cooperative. But cooperation requires specific social conditions. And modern life has systematically dismantled nearly every single one of them. This video will show you what those conditions were, why they worked for hundreds of thousands of years, and why replacing them with formal legal systems may have solved some problems while creating entirely new ones. By the end, you won't see human nature the same way. You won't see modern society the same way. And you definitely won't see rules the same way. When most people think about ancient life without laws, they imagine Thomas Hobbes. Nasty, brutish, short, everyone stabbing everyone else in the dark, murder as a casual Tuesday. But here's what almost nobody knows. The archaeological and anthropological evidence paints a completely different picture. Hunter-gatherer societies, which represent the vast majority of human history, were remarkably egalitarian and cooperative. Violence was rare. Resources were shared. Children were protected. So if there were no written laws, no police, no courts, how did this happen? The reframe is simple, but changes everything. Ancient humans absolutely had rules. They just weren't written rules enforced by distant authorities. They were social norms, enforced by the group itself through reputation, shame, exile, and reciprocity. Think about that. If you violate a social norm in a small group where everyone knows your name, where you depend on these people for food and protection, the consequence is immediate, personal, inescapable. The group doesn't wait for a trial. They respond right now. This created accountability in ways formal legal systems often fail to replicate. The myth is that laws created order. The reality is that laws replaced a different order, an older one, and in many ways, a more effective one. The evidence is everywhere once you know where to look. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, the closest living analogs to ancient human social structures, reveal consistent patterns across cultures separated by thousands of miles. Extreme egalitarianism, shared resources, consensus decision-making, minimal hierarchy. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent decades studying these groups and documented something fascinating. They don't just tolerate equality, they actively enforce it, using what he calls leveling mechanisms: humor, criticism, ostracism, and in extreme cases, coordinated group violence against anyone who tries to accumulate too much power or status. This isn't passive equality. It's actively enforced equality. The archaeological record backs this up. Ancient burial sites from across the world show remarkably little evidence of wealth inequality or status hierarchy for most of human prehistory. Grave goods are simple, similar across individuals. There are no palatial tombs, no hoarded resources, no signs of a ruling class. At least not until agriculture roughly 10,000 years ago changed everything. Here's where it gets interesting. Skeletal evidence from ancient human remains shows low rates of violent trauma compared to later agricultural societies. The brutish, savage narrative isn't supported by the bones. Conflict existed, but large-scale organized violence appears to have been rare. So what kept order in these groups? Several factors working together. Small group size, typically between 25 and 150 people. Everyone knew everyone. High interdependence. Survival required cooperation, immediate consequences. You couldn't hide from someone you wronged. And something deeper. Strong social emotions like shame, empathy, and fairness that appear to be hardwired into human psychology itself. Here's where evolutionary psychology enters the picture. Researchers like Michael Tomasello at the Max Planck Institute have spent years studying how cooperation develops in children. The findings are striking. Even toddlers as young as 18 months help strangers without being asked. They share food. They point out dangers. And here's the part that matters. They show genuine distress when resources are distributed unfairly, even when the unfairness doesn't affect them personally. A child who gets the same reward as another child but knows a third child got more will protest. They understand fairness at a level that seems almost instinctive. Across cultures, this pattern repeats. Cooperation and fairness aren't learned behaviors grafted onto selfish animals. They're biological foundations. Our closest primate relatives show the same patterns. Primatologist Frans de Waal documented Capuchin monkeys rejecting unequal pay for equal work. They'll refuse a reward if another monkey got something better. Chimpanzees demonstrate consolation behavior after conflict. They hug. They reconcile. They remember social bonds. If our closest relatives show proto-moral behavior, it's likely these capacities evolved long before humans even existed. Which means ancient humans didn't need written laws to know stealing or killing group members was wrong. Their brains were already wired to feel it. Hardwired, biological, ancient. The moral instincts that kept small groups stable for hundreds of thousands of years weren't learned from legal codes. They were written into our DNA. Wolves live in packs. Clear social structures, established hierarchies, complex cooperation, and not a single written law between them. A wolf pack hunts together, shares food, cares for injured members, resolves conflicts without courts or arbitration. The pack has rules. Absolutely. But they're enforced through body language, vocalizations, social consequences. A wolf that steals food from the alpha faces immediate repercussions. Exclusion from the hunt. Aggression. In extreme cases, exile from the pack. A wolf that attacks pups learns quickly that the entire group will turn on it. The system works because the group is small. Interactions are constant. Everyone depends on everyone else. There's nowhere to hide, no anonymous transactions, no distant authority to appeal to. just immediate social reality. And here's what most people miss. Humans operated exactly the same way for hundreds of thousands of years. We had our packs, our groups, our hierarchies and social rules, enforced not through lawyers, but through reputation, through shame, through the knowledge that you couldn't escape the consequences of your actions because you lived with the same people every single day.
Wolves have managed to avoid inventing lawyers for millions of years. Honestly, respect. The point is simple. Cooperation doesn't require bureaucracy, it requires proximity, interdependence, immediate accountability. All things ancient human groups had in abundance. All things modern societies have systematically stripped away. Everything changed 10,000 years ago, not because humans evolved, not because we became smarter or more moral, because we started farming. When humans began cultivating crops instead of hunting and gathering, group sizes exploded. Villages became towns, towns became cities. Suddenly, you were living among hundreds or thousands of people, many of whom you'd never met. And here's what happened. The social mechanisms that worked perfectly in groups of 50 completely broke down at scale. Reputation. You could wrong someone and never see them again. Shame. Hard to feel ashamed in front of strangers. Direct reciprocity. Impossible when you don't know if you'll ever interact with someone twice. You could hoard resources without immediate group pushback. You could accumulate wealth. You could dominate others. The archaeological evidence is stark. Early agricultural societies show a dramatic rise in inequality, violence, and social stratification compared to their hunter-gatherer predecessors. Skeletal evidence shows increased trauma. Burial sites show dramatic wealth differences. Some people buried with elaborate goods, others with nothing. A ruling class emerged for the first time in human history, and formal laws emerged too. Not because humans suddenly became moral or civilized, but because the old system stopped working. Hammurabi's code, Roman law. These weren't moral advancements, they were patches, desperate attempts to recreate the accountability that used to happen naturally in small groups. But something was lost in translation. Laws are impersonal, enforced by strangers wearing uniforms, written by elites protecting elite interests. The immediacy faded, the personal stake disappeared, the collective responsibility evaporated. Formal legal systems weren't a moral advancement. They were a workaround for a social problem we created by living in unnaturally large anonymous groups. They solved some problems. You can't exile someone from a city of 100,000, but they create others. Alienation, distrust, massive inequality, and a nagging sense that justice isn't really justice at all. Modern humans live in a world our brains simply weren't designed for. Massive cities, interactions with strangers, transactional relationships, distant bureaucracies making decisions about your life that you'll never appeal to a human being about. Our moral instincts evolved for small groups. Groups where reputation mattered, where relationships were long-term, where you saw the consequences of your actions reflected in the faces of people you depended on. In that context, fairness and empathy and reciprocity worked beautifully. They kept people alive. But drop those same instincts into a world of anonymous online interactions, corporate hierarchies, and legal systems run by people you'll never meet, and something breaks. We feel alienated because we're wired for tight-knit communities. We distrust institutions because our brains expect accountability to be personal and immediate, not mediated by paperwork and distant appeals. We feel like something is fundamentally wrong because something is. The modern rule-heavy world isn't more orderly than ancient societies. It's just differently broken. Studies consistently show that people in smaller, tighter communities report higher trust, lower crime, and greater life satisfaction. Meanwhile, atomized modern life, despite its legal protections, leaves people feeling unmoored and disconnected, lonely, anxious, angry at systems they can't touch or change. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We built a system that scales, a system that can handle millions of people. But in doing so, we dismantled the social infrastructure that made us human. The frustration you feel when dealing with impersonal bureaucracy, when laws seem disconnected from justice, when society feels fragmented and broken, that's not you failing to adapt to modernity. That's your ancient brain recognizing that something fundamental is missing. And it's right. Let's walk back through the journey. Ancient humans survived without formal rules because they had something better. Small, interdependent groups where cooperation was enforced through reputation, reciprocity, and immediate social consequences. Everyone knew everyone depended on everyone, and everyone paid the price if they violated the social contract. This system wasn't primitive. It was sophisticated. It leveraged hardwired human moral instincts like fairness and empathy, instincts that evolved over millions of years. It worked for hundreds of thousands of years. It kept our species alive. Then the agricultural revolution happened. Group sizes exploded. Villages became cities. The social mechanisms that worked perfectly at 50 people completely broke down at 5,000. You could wrong someone and never see them again. You could hoard, you could dominate. And formal laws emerged as a workaround, a patch for a problem we created. They solved some things, but they created others. Alienation, inequality, impersonal justice run by strangers. Modern life, with its massive scale and anonymity, is fundamentally mismatched to the social instincts we evolved over millions of years. That's why it feels broken, not because we're broken, but because the system is operating against our nature. For 90% of human history, we didn't need thousands of pages of legal code to know how to treat each other. We knew because we lived close enough to see the consequences. We knew because our survival depended on each other. We knew because fairness and cooperation weren't abstract principles. They were immediate, lived, real. Somewhere along the way, we made a trade. Intimacy for scale, accountability for anonymity.